Hey folks, my name's JR. Welcome to DIY Prepper Reloaded. A wise man named Brandon Herrera once said something along the lines of, people who are interested in SKSs are that way because they're either FUDs or broke college students who can't afford an AK. And if I'm being honest, he wasn't too far off with that, at least when it came to me and how I came to own the SKS that I have here. I got this right before my last semester in college for a grand total of $250, and on top of that, I think my dad split the cost with me. It was sort of a quasi-early birthday present. I didn't have a whole lot of money, but I wanted a decent semi-auto rifle, and this was a lot cheaper than any AR-15 at the time, so I got it. Now, a lot of things have changed over the years. They aren't nearly as cheap to buy or shoot as it used to be, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But one thing that hasn't changed is how tough and reliable these rifles are. So today, we're going to talk about the history of the SKS, go over its features, pros and cons, and whether or not it's still a viable option for somebody looking for a survival rifle. The SKS was designed in the early 1940s by Sergei Semenov. At this point in history, most Russian troops were using Mosin Nagants. Mosins are bolt-action rifles that use the 7.62 x 5.4 cartridge, which is kind of similar to the American 30-06. So even though there were other weapons in their arsenal, most Russian soldiers were running around with long, unwieldy rifles that were slow to fire, didn't hold many rounds, and kick like an angry mule who was just told that they're fat. And that's where the SKS comes in. It was designed to be semi-automatic and use the 7.62 x 39 cartridge, which is the same as the AK-47. And using the new 7.62 x 39 cartridge gave the SKS two big advantages over the old Mosin. As an intermediate cartridge, it's smaller, meaning you can fit more rounds into the gun, and those rounds will also have less recoil. That allowed for faster follow-up shots, which helped troops to take full advantage of its semi-automatic action, and it also reduced how often they had to reload it. Having a smaller round also made it easier to carry more ammunition on body and help make logistics a little easier, because more rounds is always a good thing, whether it's inside a rifle's magazine, in a soldier's kit, or in a crate on a transport truck. And even though full production of the SKS didn't begin until around 1949, it did see some use in 1945 during the final months of World War II. They used that trial period to refine the design a little more before they were mass produced. Full production lasted in Russia from around 1949 to 1958, but SKSs were produced in China until around 1980. Now, 9 years isn't really all that long of a service period for a military rifle, and there's a very good reason why the SKSs was cut short, the AK-47. While the SKS is semi-automatic, the AK is select fire, meaning it can fire full auto. It also uses a 30-round detachable magazine, which is a big improvement over the SKS's 10-round fixed magazine. The AK is also shorter, which makes it more handy, and most important of all, it was cheaper to produce. SKSs have a milled receiver, meaning that they're cut out of a solid block of steel. AKs, on the other hand, have stamped receivers, which are easier, cheaper, and faster to produce. You can get higher-end AKs with milled receivers now, but military ones tend to be stamped just because of the cost. There is some belief that the SKS was produced as a temporary bridge between the bolt-action Mosin Nagant and the AK. Weapons like the American M1 Garand and German Sturmgewehr really caught the attention of Soviet leadership, and they wanted something produced in large quantities that could compete with those other rifles, and they wanted them quickly. The SKS was quicker to get out the door, and it served as a stopgap until the AK was ready a few years later. Now, even though the SKS didn't see a lot of action in Russian hands, it doesn't mean that it wasn't used. They were produced by several countries and were used in some major conflicts, including Korea and Vietnam. They're also the ceremonial rifles for some countries, so you'll see them at things like military parades and other events. But despite all that, there were still a ton of rifles that were manufactured and placed in storage in practically new condition. After the Soviet Union fell, huge numbers of them flooded the American consumer market. At one time, you could get brand new rifles for well under $100 a pop. And even though I'm at least the second owner of mine, I think that my SKS may have been like that. When I got it, it was in almost perfect condition. It was so perfect that it still had cosmoline inside of it. Cosmoline is this thick, sticky stuff that they use to prevent the rifles from rusting while they're in storage, and it was very, very effective, but the only problem with it is you have to clean it off extremely well before you try to use the gun. Whoever owned the SKS before me didn't do that, and it caused some pretty significant malfunctions like hang fires. That's where you pull the trigger and the round takes a few seconds to actually go off. So if you get one of these, don't assume that the person before you did a good job cleaning it. That's like cheating on a test, only to find out that the guy that you copied off of is a bigger idiot than you are. I had to take mine apart, get all the cosmeline out of all the nooks and crannies, and put it back together. After I did that, though, I haven't had any issues with it since. And that's probably the biggest selling point for these rifles, is they've always been regarded as very well built and reliable, and their accuracy isn't bad either. Now, getting into specs, we've already talked about how the SKS is a semi-automatic rifle that has a 10-round fixed magazine. The magazine can be loaded either by using stripper clips, which is the fastest, or just by hand. To use a stripper clip, pull the bolt back and allow it to lock in place, then slide the clip into the notch on the front of the bolt carrier and use your thumb to push the rounds down into the magazine. Some people say that the rounds will go in a little easier if you use your index finger to raise the end of the top round just a little bit. I haven't needed to do that with mine. I just keep my thumb close to the back of the rounds and shove them right in. But if you're gonna get stripper clips, be sure to get good ones. Mine are Czech and they're marked BXN. They're considered to be some of the better ones out there. A lot of the new modern production stuff supposedly isn't as good. I wouldn't know because these are the only ones that I have, and I got them specifically because other people talked about how good they are. And so far in my experience, they've been right about that. If you need to unload the rifle, you can open the magazine and the rounds will spill out of the bottom, but don't forget to remove the round in the chamber as well, because if you don't, that could be bad. You can also get detachable magazines for SKSs, but they usually aren't as reliable as the fixed box mags. That's why I haven't messed with those. Now, there are some SKSs that will take AK mags, but those are pretty expensive and they're not as common as the others. One of the most distinctive features, though, of the SKS is the bayonet. It's permanently attached to the rifle, and to deploy it, all you do is pull down here and swing it out. It'll then lock in place like this. Mine is a Yugoslavian SKS, so it has a blade-style bayonet, while others, like the Chinese, will have a spike. Another very distinctive feature of my rifle is this big honking muzzle attachment thing here on the end, and that's actually a grenade launcher. How it works is you stick a special grenade on the end of it, turn off the gas system, and then raise up your grenade sights from there. You'll fire it by loading a blank into the chamber and pulling the trigger. I think that there were some situations where the guy using it forgot to load a blank and then accidentally unalive themselves in truly spectacular fashion by shooting through the grenade on the end of the rifle with a real round. Fun times there. You can also get training grenades at one time. They're a little hard to find now since the supply is pretty much dried up. Then SKSs have a cleaning rod here underneath the barrel. You can get to that by opening or closing the bayonet about halfway and then just sliding out. Then they also came with a small cleaning kit that fits inside the stock here. It's basically a small metal capsule with some brushes and other cleaning tools inside. Now, some people will compare the SKS to the AK, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they do have some visual similarities. The sights look a whole lot alike, and then you have the handguard here over the top of the barrel that contains the gas tube. But the two designs are actually very different. The SKS uses a short stroke gas system where the gas piston sits in here and then moves a secondary piston extension or operating rod inside of this section here. That operating rod then knocks the bolt back and then recoil spring will push it back forward again. An AK, on the other hand, uses a long stroke gas system. The gas piston reaches all the way from the gas tube and connects directly to the bolt. That makes the AK more reliable, but the SKS should have a little lower felt recoil. The short stroke gas system lends itself to that, at least in theory, but the heavier weight of the SKS helps with that too. You know, inertia. Science! When it comes to the trigger, the one on my SKS is what I would characterize as light but squishy. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort to pull it, but it goes quite a ways before it breaks. Because of that, most people won't be able to shoot it as fast as they would something like an AR-15 that has a shorter, more crisp trigger. The sights on an SKS are similar to those found on an AK and sit fairly low in relation to the barrel, and that may be an issue if you wear glasses. I find myself having to look over my glasses while I'm shooting, and if you're like me and you aren't quite to the Mr. Magoo level of blind, that might not be a bad thing. I mean, it's not great, but as long as you can figure out which blob is the bad guy, you can be okay. Sights, just like an AK, have an adjustable rear sight and then a front sight protected by a hood. There are some differences, but they're pretty small. If you can use one, you can use the other. Yugo SKSs also have flip-up tritium night sights. Now, since they're so old, the tritium doesn't glow very well. It has to be pretty dark for you to see it, and even then, it isn't bright. I think you can get replacement vials, though. SKSs are also fairly heavy. Mine, being a Yugo, is around 9.5 pounds, while Russian and Chinese models are around 8.5. Most of that extra weight on mine comes because of the grenade thing here on the front. An AR, on the other hand, weighs around 7 pounds before you start adding a bunch of junk to it, and an AK is just under 7 1/3. So SKSs are going to be a little heavier than other options, and it's also longer. So if you're used to shooting shorter rifles, then the SKS is going to seem a little bit unwieldy. Now, as far as cost is concerned, the world is a much different place, even than it was when I got mine in 2010. The market was full of Yugo SKSs that you could get for a couple $100s, even though the Chinese and Russian SKSs did cost a little more even then. But today, these are a lot more expensive. Prices start around $700 and then go up from there. Then ammo for them is more expensive too. Back before Putin decided to take a field trip, you could get 20 rounds of steel-cased Russian 7.62 by 39 ammo for around $5 or $6. And with all the sanctions, though, that ammo is gone. Now you'll be paying 2 or 3 times as much for that same amount of ammo. So unfortunately, the days of the SKS being a poor man's option are long gone. So at the end of the day, is the SKS still a viable option for somebody wanting a rifle for long-term survival? As far as durability and reliability are concerned, yeah, they're well built, work pretty much every time, and they're fairly accurate, but they are a little dated. The fact that they don't come with the detachable magazine and aren't as easy to upgrade with more modern optics is a big drawback. You can upgrade an SKS, but it isn't nearly as easy as bolting something onto a rail. When you combine that with the fact that the SKS will cost around as much as an entry-level AR or AK, then I think the reasons to own an SKS compared to the others just aren't really there anymore. That being said, if you have the money and you just want one, then by all means, go for it. They're still good guns. It's good enough that I'm not going to sell mine. Now, if you want to see my review of the CZ75P01, which has been my carry gun for over 13 years, then click here. Or if you want to see things that could ruin your ammo stockpile, then click here. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.